All right, this is section 4.1, geography in ancient Egypt. And remember, the geography is, the way the land is, land features. The big idea is that the water, fertile soils, and protected setting of the Nile Valley allowed a great civilization to arise in Egypt around 3200 BC. Main idea is that Egypt was called the gift of the Nile because the Nile River gave life to the desert. Civilization developed along the Nile after people began farming in this region, and strong kings unified all of Egypt. So the first main idea, again, Egypt was called the gift of the Nile because the Nile River gave life to the desert. The Nile River brought life to Egypt and allowed it to thrive. Biannual flooding of the Nile made farming possible. Here are some of the features of the Nile. The Nile is the longest river in the world, with a distance over 4,000 miles. Ancient Egypt included two regions, a southern and a northern region, that were given their names by their relation to the Nile. At several points, the rough terrain caused cataracts or rapids to form, and the Nile divided into several branches, forming a delta, a triangular area of land made from soil deposited by a river. Your map is sideways, because the only way I could fit it on there for you to see, but we'll take a look at my map. So what we were just talking about, this delta, is right here, okay? And this is the branches of the river coming off and depositing really fresh soil. So this is some of the most fertile soil around the Nile, is at this delta where it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. These red lines here are cataracts, okay? And those are like small rapids, not a waterfall, but much smaller than a waterfall, but like I said, rapids, really rocky areas in the river where it was very difficult to travel by boat. And you see that the river flows north and empties into the Mediterranean Sea. And this might seem a little bit weird to you because this is Lower Egypt, this is Upper Egypt. In our brains, we might think that this is Upper Egypt and this is Lower Egypt, but that's not the case because it's by the land. The land is a little bit higher here than it is down in here. That's why it's called Lower Egypt, because of the elevation of the land, how low it is compared to sea level. And along the Nile, you have an eastern desert and a western desert. So you can see it's surrounded by desert. You have the Red Sea over here. And then if you remember correctly, this will be Mesopotamia over here. And again, the Mediterranean Sea up here. So you can see that it is well protected. The Nile River is well guarded from outside people. Okay, moving on. The floods of the Nile. We talked about the flooding in Mesopotamia. That was flash flooding. That happened instantly, and it was dangerous. The flooding in the Nile is a lot simpler flooding. It's just a gradual, spill of the water over onto the land. It's not flash flooding. It's not an instant thing, and it's not as dangerous as flash flooding is. So little rain fell in the Egyptian desert, but the Nile flooded every year in the summer and fall, and that's where the biannual flooding that we were just talking about on previous page. The Nile's flooding coated the land around it with a rich silt that made the soil ideal for farming. Just like in Mesopotamia, that fresh soil that was deposited on the land from the flooding, that also happened in the Nile. Without the floods, people could never have farmed in Egypt. It would have never been able to happen without that rich soil from the floods. Main idea 2, civilization developed along the Nile after people began farming in this region. That should make sense. Once they start farming, that's when civilization was going to develop there, because we talked about that and how the agricultural revolution led to people settling in one area. The Nile provided both water and fertile soil for farming. They gave them both. So, and you know all the things that they could use water for: drinking, cooking, bathing, transportation, fishing, all the things that we talked about earlier in the year. Egypt's location offered another advantage because it had natural barriers that made it hard to invade. And that's what I just showed you on the last map, is they had deserts on both sides of the Nile. You had the Red Sea. You had those cataracts in the south that made it difficult for ships to sail. And then you had the Mediterranean Sea. So you could see it was well protected. Okay, here's just a picture of farming in Egypt. Farmers in ancient Egypt learned how to grow wheat and barley. So those are some of the products that they used, and you can see it in the picture. This tomb painting shows a couple harvesting their crops. Farmers in Egypt still use the fertile lands along the Nile River to grow food. Still today, it's a big part of Egypt and their culture. The Nile Valley. Canals were built to carry water to fields of wheat, barley, fruits, and vegetables. The Nile allowed farmers to raise animals such as cattle and sheep. The river also provided many types of fish to eat, and hunters trapped ducks and geese. As we said, natural barriers made Egypt hard to invade. Okay, the deserts. Okay, the desert in the west was too big and harsh to cross. I don't think you want to be crossing a desert. It's really hard to find your way. It's very hot. It's hard to walk in sand. Mediterranean and Red Sea provided protection from invasion. And then those cataracts in the Nile made it difficult to invade from the south. Main idea 3, strong kings unified all of Egypt. According to tradition, Menes rose to power in Upper Egypt and unified the two kingdoms by taking control of Lower Egypt and by marrying a Lower Egyptian princess. So Menes is the one who unified Egypt. Menes was probably Egypt's first pharaoh, the title used by the rulers of Egypt. That's what we call a ruler of Egypt, a pharaoh. He also founded Egypt's first dynasty, or series of rulers from the same family. The first dynasty lasted for about 200 years and extended Egyptian territory southward along the Nile.